Alright, starting the Thinkaloud assignment. I already went ahead and skipped the intro of the video just to like the first 35 seconds. So I'm looking right at the title screen, speaking in tongues. Starting with African-looking tribal people, probably because that's what's thought of as the origin of the human species, is African people. Showing a lot of political images, a lot of hugely historical images like Nazis and Martin Luther King Jr. So I guess they're trying to portray how language is important in persuading a people, like a national identity. I know you were talking about identity earlier. Oh look, it's Noam Chomsky. Of course he's always involved somehow. This guy is saying we can't really think abstractly without language, which is something we talked about in class the other day, sort of about how, you know, first of all, we're combining language in a neurotypical sort of way, but also the idea that complex and sophisticated thought isn't possible without language is something we sort of talked about the other day. So the whole foundation of this video is being set in something that I think we didn't universally agree upon, and they're using it in sort of a very generalistic way, so that might be sort of a problematic way to start the video. More political imagery. So this guy is comparing language to handy tools, saying that like language is sort of a tool on the same plane. But I feel like it's really hard to compare the two. You know, like language just is as a tool on a whole other level. And we did talk about how, you know, language might have actually evolved from the use of handy tools. So it's sort of a chicken and the egg kind of thing. Not always the use of words. This guy is just defining language as the use of words, but it's definitely way more than that. So I feel like they're trying to like dumb this down a little bit at first, is what it sounds like. They're trying to explain it in a very simplistic, generalistic kind of way. Alright, this guy is starting to make things sound a little more diverse. Things differ from language to language. It depends. I can barely hear what they're saying right now. I don't know if I'm able to comment on any of this. Just sort of looks like images of diversity, just showing different languages, what people look like from different language parts of the world. I guess a fair, or this looks like some kind of festival, is a great place to show diversity. Like, large groups of people are always a good image to use in terms of gatherings of different types of people. Showing a lot of old-fashioned imagery in this video, something I'm curious about. Everything, not everything, but a lot of what they've shown is like old-timey, like 50s, 60s kind of videos. I wonder what the thought process is behind that. Not so sure. Well, that's true. Yeah, I thought she just wasn't going to say, I thought she was going to say we wouldn't be human beings without language, which humans would still probably exist, but definitely not the way that we are, because languages shape human culture in such a strong, inseparable way. You can't separate a human language from its culture. and vice versa. Oh, monkeys. Great imagery to show the evolution of humankind and like how far we've come. Stuff like that. Oh, they're so cute. That's true. We haven't been able to teach chimpanzees to speak. But, yeah. See, this guy is holding speech as the highest form of language. Like, he mentioned sign language, but he sort of was like, oh, they learned sign language, but they can't speak. As if learning a whole system of communication as complex as sign language isn't good enough. It's just a bunch of old white guys talking. Sorry. Part 2. Ah, that was a really long, awkward break in between the two parts. Aw, puppies. Again, very old videos and imagery. I have to wonder why. So are they trying to say these dogs are capable of language? No. Okay, so they're just trying to dissect canine communication. Yeah. Right. I guess it's sort of easy for humans to decipher dog speech. It's a lot easier for domesticated animals just because, you know, human domesticated civilizations are more familiar with those animals, so more familiar with the sounds that they make and the different meanings that they portray. I'm sure that dog sounds have been studied extensively in science. And there's probably a bit of anthropomorphization involved. Yeah. Yeah, language is really important in sort of the speed at which humankind has evolved, just because transporting messages is a lot faster through language as we know it today compared to more primitive forms, and it can can transfer more complex messages more easily. So I guess that's what he was trying to say. This is kind of weird, artistic section. I don't know what language that woman was speaking in. Early evolution of language. So this is probably going to be a lot about what we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago. Darwin. Talked about good old Darwin. I don't know if we can compare it that linearly. And of course, Darwin was really just scratching the tip of the iceberg with that one. So sure, he's allowed to make those kind of generalized statements because they haven't gotten into the nitty-gritty of the process of evolution. We'll see how they expand on that idea. Right. I'm just talking about physical evolution of humans right now. Right, so these guys are talking about, we sort of decided in class that the development of walking on two legs and standing upright is sort of what came first, but that was caused by a differing environment. So the environment changed, so then the human body changed, which is sort of what sparked the whole thing. They're showing the evolution of the monkey starting to walk upright, turning into cavemen. was actually learning in one of my other classes in physiological psychology that there was actually a very recent fossil discovery that can actually date the beginning of humans, or maybe it was just the humans' migration out of Africa is actually a lot earlier than we originally thought it was. I think it might have actually just been the migration out of Africa. But still, that kind of information, even about the history of the beginning of humans, is changing constantly, even today. People think that, you know, we figured it out and that's fact, and it's just that's gonna be the way it was forever. But this kind of information is still changing constantly. That is a serious presumption. And again, we were talking about in my physiological psychology class, just because we were talking a lot about the evolution of humans, about how the change in the size of the human brain wasn't as important as was the evolution of more neural connections within the brain. So I think that is actually more of a specific or more of a significant evolution, especially in terms of language, than the actual volume of the brain itself. Because there are tons of animals with really huge brains, like whales and mammoths and elephants and stuff, but they still don't have that kind of cognitive sophistication. Yep. Yeah, that's what I think they said was a lot earlier than originally thought of because of fossils. Now we're talking about tools. So I guess they're talking about how similar tools were being seen in very different parts of the world. So I think it's hard to tell really if that was sort of an analogous creation or if there was actually a communication between peoples far away from each other, allowing those kinds of tools and technologies to be developing in very different parts of the earth. That's I think, a yet unanswered question. I'm not sure. Showing the migration of humankind. People really like to make a lot of generalizations about genes. I remember watching another video just about how, like, genes and race aren't really as related as we think they are. So using genes as a basis of the evolution of different races, I don't know if that's particularly sound. I feel like I'm just being very skeptical of everything I see in this video. Let me try to be more positive. So we're talking a lot about the physical evolution of humans right now. This is more about like the surface level outside appearances. I wonder how they're going to connect this to the voice and speech. Maybe they're just giving this kind of background for people watching that maybe just don't understand the basics of human evolution. Like, I feel like I've already talked about this a lot in this class and in many other classes. So I sort of already know all this background. That yes, people are different. Playing a didgeridoo to talk about African peoples. Okay. So they're sort of talking about natural selection at this point, that the more evolved humans will continue to reproduce because they have better tools of survival. Okay, so they're talking about how beings closer to humans today had not only, better brains, but because of their better brains, they had better weapons, which means they could eat better and have larger populations. So that, through the process of evolution, made older humanoid species kind of die out. Oh, so they're saying that language is why modern humans survived. That's an interesting idea. I think I can get behind it. Because language can just, I guess, create better harmony, better strategy within a community or tribe. So it just makes things, it calls for better reproduction and better survival. Now we're actually talking about the evolution of speech organs, which is more related to what we were talking about in class. Right, so infants, in many ways, are similar to our evolutionary ancestors. It's always why it's interesting to use infants to see sort of where we were biologically. Right. It's interesting how people care more about studying the brain than the vocal tract itself. Because in class we talked mostly about the evolution of the voice box and the muscles and bones in the throat. But I guess they're going to focus on the brain here, which is cool for a psychology major. I'm fine with that. So they're talking about the evolution of the brain in terms of working memory, which I think is definitely applicable to language, because you think about starting to communicate with people. If someone tries to communicate a message to you, having the ability to remember that message for longer periods of time and for greater detail, or with greater detail, can definitely aid in the process of evolution. Remembering those messages correctly and for a long period of time is definitely an advantage in survival. So I can see that. What is this video showing? Again, very old-timey videos. I don't understand why they're showing such old, creepy-looking videos. So dramatic. Okay, so that's the idea of productivity. I guess that he's discussing one of Hackett's criteria, that we have a finite number of words within our long-term memory, but we can combine it to an infinite number of ideas, and that's the idea of productivity. I wonder if that kid was speaking from a script. Even if language is solely a cognitive ability, humans aren't the only creatures with brains. So I don't understand what this guy's trying to say. We have a highly developed brain. And of course, studying children's speech is always popular. That kid's such a pretty singer. He's so cute. That's pretty. So they're using music to talk about the actual physical production of sound through the vocal cords, which I guess is just sort of an attractive, sexy way of selling it. Even though they used a child, it was still cute, you know. I feel like people might actually be more interested in singing than they are with speaking, and from a general public standpoint, you know, setting words to music is always more exciting or more interesting. That's why I think I remember talking about in maybe some other class about how is music a language? If music actually fits into Hackett's criteria, but it's so hard to separate music from language in a lot of cases. Of course, there's instrumental music, but music with words is also extremely popular. So I guess you have to completely just think about the use of instrumental music in conveying messages, and does that count as a language? I would say no. But that's an interesting idea to explore. Yeah, she was talking about how we're still making discoveries in terms of like history and archaeology and stuff. So that's why I feel like everything has to be taken with a this is what we know so far kind of idea, instead of this is how it is. It's how I feel like you should talk about things in terms of history and archaeology. But Noam Chomsky seems to be very confident in what he's talking about. Okay. They're really trying to sell this stuff. They're playing weird exotic music. They're showing, you know, really exotic kind of art in places, especially when you're talking about like African, Middle Eastern kind of cultures. This is in Jerusalem. I was actually there in January. I know exactly where that was. But just the way they're like displaying it in sort of an exotic way. It's very Eurocentric. Right, talking about language depth, which is still occurring in a lot of places, and I think globalization is actually really hindering the use of non-mainstream languages. I think languages are probably dying out faster than they've ever been before because of globalization. Right. Language isn't easy to trace back if there's no written or fossil record. So it's all speculation at this point. Right, so this guy's continuing the idea that walking on 2 feet is definitely the spark of language, which I think a lot of people who wouldn't study this and don't have the same kind of linguistic background as the students in this class do think walking upright can't possibly be related to the development of language, like they're two completely different things. But once you start talking about it from a historical perspective, it makes a lot more sense. Right. That's why walking on 2 feet is such a big deal in all fields, almost, especially when you're looking at the historical perspective. In any kind of field, walking on 2 feet is such a huge breakthrough. It frees up the top half of the body, which then frees up the brain, which, you know, sets forth all this kind of stuff. So it seems to be widely agreed upon that walking on 2 feet was the thing that started it all. Oh, look, a dressed up cute little monkey. What a great way to start a video. Wow. This is so silly. Right, okay, so I've heard of the Bow Wow theory. You're just sounds of nature turned into words. Which I feel like you have to think about, like if you think about it backwards, like from where languages now goes back and back, more simplified. And at one point, you know, we were monkeys. So like, monkey grunts had to have been the start of it all, right? You know, because all these animals that are our ancestors make sounds, so you have to think that maybe that was the foundation. Right. Yeah, that's where I think the Bow Wow theory has some ground. There is obviously a transition period where those weird grunts and squeals and noises sort of had to turn into words, just like baby speech is what they're using to demonstrate this right now. And again, this goes back to how we use infants to compare humans to our ancestors, because humans are most similar, or infants are most similar in that way. We're seeing sign language. It's nice that they're including sign language in modern human language. Occasionally right. That was funny. Noam Chomsky's occasionally right. It's so funny how some people still disagree with the Africa theory, probably because of racist reasons, but it's weird. You really can take some pieces of knowledge for granted in an academic setting where you're like, yeah, I know that, everybody knows that, but not everybody knows that, or at least not everybody accepts that as truth. Again, sort of using this exoticism to show the African people, you know, with masks and dances and stuff. It's great to highlight different African cultures, but I feel like we're definitely, in this video, sort of using them as a display of exoticism. This guy talks with a lot of animation. Ooh, this guy has serious opinions about the monogenesis theory. He just totally backtracked. He was like, oh, no one would respect you if you believe in this. But on the other hand, it could be true. That was kind of weird. It's so hard to have a solid opinion in discussions like these, because a lot of our evidence is so inconclusive, the only thing possible is inference. Okay, so this guy's a proponent of monogenesis, it sounds like. Okay, so the idea is that one small group that was sort of like the first of the modern humans had one language, and every single language that exists has evolved from that first language. It really just follows sort of the general evolution model that every creature and organism on this earth has one common ancestor. So I feel like it's really easy to translate that idea into the evolution of language. That every language that ever existed comes from one common ancestor. It also sounds kind of convenient. Yeah, like this guy says, you know, using genes to sort of compare this. It's a nice idea. It all fits nicely together and it's very convenient, but who knows if that's actually what is the case. Because usually in nature, things are a lot more messy than that. Nothing actually fits that neatly into place. Yeah, sounds like there has to be a lot of skepticism with something that neat and tidy. Seems to be a lot of skepticism everywhere. Maybe it's just coming from me, but it sounds like a lot of the scholars in this video are, you know, portraying the different theories with a grain of salt. Seems to be the case. Proto-world. There's a cat. I wonder what kind of weird novelty they're going to use to introduce this video with the cat. Okay, I haven't actually heard of proto-world, so I'm waiting for someone to actually describe it. What is it? Okay, so this is a controversial idea. Why are there cats? What does this have to do with anything? Those are probably the same people that think the Earth is only a couple thousand years old. Now, here's the thing about going back to the monogenesis theory. The idea is that modern humans all came from the same place. So if every language didn't come from the same place, then where did other language start up if modern humans all came from the same place? I don't know. I feel like none of these theories are perfect. What was the word? I'm actually going to go back a few minutes because I missed... Oh, Paul meaning too. Okay, I didn't go back. Once again, that's kind of neat and tidy and convenient. Okay, finally someone actually explained what proto-world meant, that we can actually sort of trace things back to the original language, which I feel like is impossible, probably because there's no written record of this original language is my guess. If it's going that far back, it's that much earlier than the first written language, there's no way to actually figure it out. Yeah. Right, sort of like the cells in your body, how, like, you know, after every 7 years, every single cell in your body has been regenerated or replaced by something else. It's the same thing with language. I had to read Beowulf in high school, but it was an English translation. they showed us the first chapter of Beowulf in the actual original script, and we were like, I have no idea what this is. So even what we consider English isn't really what English was when it started. So does that count as a different language? Because it still counts as English by a lot of people. So like defining difference in different languages is also not a neat, easy way to do it. Yep, a lot of skepticism involved here. Is there anyone that's not a skeptic? It's funny how easy it is to compare the world of biology to the world of linguistics, especially from this historical perspective and categorization. There's a lot of just within this video, there's a lot of comparison between the world of biology and the world of linguistics. Okay. I really wonder what the purpose is of trying to find this proto-language. Like, I feel like it's almost the we're doing it because we can kind of idea. Is there a purpose to trying to figure this out? Like, is there, even if you did find it, like, oh, look, we figured out the proto-language, what are you supposed to do with it? So this guy thinks he figured it out. I wonder what they're going to say about it. Oh. Does that mean we can't analyze it if it was never translated into English? Gotcha. So yeah, I bet that's probably a huge struggle in trying to figure out early languages from a lexical standpoint, is that we just didn't, the world was completely different. We didn't have agriculture or animals like the guy said. So like you don't even have words to compare to. I feel like studying this from a biological perspective does actually make a lot more sense, just because everything that I've seen in this video from a historical archaeological perspective just seems really shaky. Like, one person will talk about this theory and then they'll switch to another speaker who's like, this theory is a load of garbage. But when you're talking more about the actual physical evolution of speech organs and like fossil findings, more physical evidence, it's harder to argue with, not impossible to argue with, but it's just a bit more solid and empirically based instead of based on speculation, which I'm more of a fan of. Right. It is impossible to know. This whole video has been people making intelligent guesses. So now we're talking specifically about sounds and sound systems. Is the sound system? Is that what you said? The sound system is the main distinction between human language and other forms of communication? So we have a more sophisticated sound system? I guess I can get behind that. Because it allows for greater productivity, I guess. Oh yeah, we were talking about this, how they weren't even allowed to talk about the origin of language because it was such a deep political and religious argument, you know, with the Tower of Babylon and all that junk. I shouldn't say junk, but all that hypothesis is a nicer way to put it. But it's just so funny that people banned the discussion of it. That seems to be something that, a practice that still goes on today, that like, oh, talking about it makes people upset, we're just not going to talk about it at all. Just ban it completely. It's just funny how you'd think, oh, that's kind of barbaric, but that definitely still happens today. And it's not a productive technique, in my opinion. It just doesn't help with the progression. Like, we're talking about communication here. You know, we're talking about the evolution of language and communication. So banning communicating about something and talking about something is very counterproductive. It's almost like meta counterproductive. We're not allowed to communicate about the origin of communication. That's very silly. Academia, the world of academia can be so silly sometimes. These animations are fantastic. Oh wow. I'm sorry, but these animations are very funny. Oh yeah, I remember learning about this. Highly unethical. Trying to figure out if babies can make up their own languages. So many things wrong with this study. So many problems with the whole Beckos thing. Not only is it unethical, but like the findings mean nothing. You know, the inferences made mean absolutely nothing. It's kind of preposterous, in my opinion. Sanskrit was the original, or the first written language. Or no, that was Sumerian. It's so funny, they keep going back to Jerusalem when I just visited there. It's an extremely historical place. It was awesome. But I also feel like it's a very Christian-centric idea. You know, that like, apparently Jerusalem was like where creation happened and like where Jesus was. So obviously that's where the first of everything happened. So Hebrew must be the first language. Yeah, it's the language of the Bible, just like the guy in the video said. So still kind of very Christian-centric. Yeah, a lot of nationalism involved. I feel like everybody just wants to say that their language was first because it gives them some kind of sense of superiority, which doesn't make any sense. It's where the nationalism kicks in. Because one's language is definitely tied to their sense of nationalism for sure. That's where the whole speak American things come from. People probably think that English is America's national language, even though it's not. But I think that's where the idea of trying to search for the original language is just seeped in nationalism. Because you want your language to be the first one because for some reason it has some kind of sense of superiority. Okay, so talking about how the clicks are the original language. Yeah, once again, it is sort of kind of a neat idea because clicks are sort of a simple sound. Anyone can actually make them. Incorporating them into language seems to be difficult if you don't grow up in those cultures. Yeah, this guy's got it. There's no point in trying to reconstruct the original language. I feel like this guy's been the most down to earth of everybody here. The most realistic in terms of thinking about it. Because everybody, oh, that's the end. Everybody wants to be the guy that discovers the first language. It's such a romantic idea. Just, again, it's with the nationalism, it's the superiority, it's the Christian centrism, the Eurocentrism. There's a lot of stuff sort of seeped into it that people don't want to recognize when you're the one trying to figure it out. Also, I don't see much of a point in figuring it out. Well, that was the end of the video. I feel like I spent the entire video sort of bashing what everybody said, which I don't think is what I meant to do. But there's obvious that even the people in this video often spoke with a serious sense of skepticism, and just about how everything is inconclusive, or like this hypothesis is bad and this theory is bad, and we don't have an answer. So it's really hard to have those kind of discussions, especially when you're in someone in my position where you're still learning about everything and you're absorbing. So you hear a theory and you're like, oh, okay, that could be true, but then you hear another theory and they're contrasting and contradicting. So trying to put all the pieces together is very difficult, and I guess that's what all of these academics in this video are trying to do. And who knows if there would actually be an endpoint to that. But good video. I liked that.